My name is Kahumbu. I'm the CEO of Green Dreams Tech Limited, and I'm the founder of the award-winning digital agricultural extension service used by over 1.5 million smallholder farmers called iCow. I'm also Kenya's first certified soil food web lab technician through the famous Elaine Soil Food Web School, one of only 13 on the African continent. I've been studying and practicing regenerative agriculture for 22 years, and I hope that my presentation and experience will help shed light on the real drivers of food insecurity in Kenya. Our data on iCow from thousands of farmers doesn't support the notion that the solution to food security for Kenya is in the adoption of GMOs. In addition to lack of water exacerbated by climate change, our data suggests that our food insecurity is due to failed soils, and that this has been caused over the years by our agricultural practices of tillage and use of toxic and synthetic inputs. These have devastated the soil microbiome, which, as we all know, underpins soil health. Most of Kenyan soils are now dead. I'll also show that by following regenerative agricultural practices, soil begins to heal and crop yields increase in as short a time as one growing season. And I finally end my presentation with a few recommendations on how Kenya can achieve food security by adopting and prioritizing regenerative practices that prioritize the health of the soil microbiome. This slide is from Dr. David Johnson, a molecular biologist conducting research at the Institute for Sustainable Agricultural Research at New Mexico State University. He's an adjunct professor at the Center for Regenerative Agriculture and Resilient Systems at California State University. Dr. Johnson did an experiment to find out which nutrients were responsible for driving yields in crops. He grew crops using 10 different types of composts, and then he tracked the growth of the crops and compared them with the different mineral nutrients. He thought the biggest contributor to crop yield would be nitrogen. His results showed, however, that nitrogen quantities didn't affect crop growth as expected. As you can see from the graph, the highest growth was achieved in the first two samples. However, they had the lowest levels of nitrogen. Samples 4 and 5 had the highest levels of nitrogen yet, and their yields were lower. The same example was carried out checking for potassium, then phosphorus, and even organic matter, with the results showing that the yield increases were seemingly not related to these either. Intrigued by these results, finally he looked at microbes, and what he found was that the ratio between the microorganisms seems to be driving yields, in particular, the fungal to bacterial ratio. This discovery led to new research and underpins a science around regenerative agriculture today, based on the soil food web. This diagram of the soil food web shows the interconnectedness between the microbes in the soil and how vital they are in decomposing and recycling organic matter through various organisms, and in the process, developing soils, converting nutrients into plant-available forms, and more. The soil food web includes and is fundamentally driven by bacteria, fungi, protozoa, including amoeba, flagellates, and ciliates, root bacterial fungal feeding, as well as predatory nematodes, micro, and finally, macroarthropods. The soil food web works in harmony with plants to produce a number of benefits, and in agriculture, the most important being their contribution to soil integrity, structure, and health, which result in increased yields, protection from pests and diseases, reduced irrigation requirements, no need for fertilizers, weed suppression, protection against soil erosion, and finally, the soil food web contributes enormously to carbon sequestration, as we know, where plants draw down carbon dioxide and microbes in healthy soils lock this carbon in the ground. Now, for the past 2 years, I've been studying the soil food web and assessing the microbes in soils and soil amendments, compost and vermiculture, teas and extracts. I've looked through hundreds of samples, and I'm astounded at the difference one can see between soils that are lacking in microbes, essentially dead, compact, degraded, and soils that are alive. The relationship between healthy crops and healthy soil microbiome is so tangible when magnified 400 times under a microscope, and yet invisible to us all on our farms. And this is what I feel needs to change. In June 2021, I started a short course teaching soil advocacy to interested individuals in Kenya using Zoom. A year later, in May 2022, I began to teach a second course in soil microscopy, sharing the images from my microscope over Zoom with several students across Kenya. Being able to visualize the life in soils was an absolute game changer. It gave us all baselines to work from as we implemented our ways to build our soil life, starting with very practical activities like composting and keeping our soils covered at all times to ensure that the microbes in the ground received sugars and food from the plants above. This evolutionary mutualistic partnership results in the microbes building soil aggregates and sharing micronutrients and water back to the plants in a regenerative cycle powered by the soil food web. We learned that our agricultural practices of clearing, plowing, and tilling destroy the soil microbiome and result in degraded soils, but that we can turn this around in a single season, as you shall see. The design of the courses required students did practicals in their homes and communities and reported this back to class in the form of photos and videos. The next slide is a series of pictures from one of my students in Trans Nzoia. Many students have similar stories to share. Paul Migai began to manage his crop using the information he learned in class and following regenerative practices of zero tillage and use of vermiculture, earthworm tea extract, as a form of plant protection and nutrition, as well as microbial inoculant for his soils. A former conventional farmer, Paul used to spend about 15,000 shillings an acre in inputs on his 7-acre parcel of land and was formerly harvesting about 14 90-kilo bags of maize per acre. The season he changed to adopting regenerative practices, his input costs dropped to under 1,000 shillings an acre, and he had an increased yield from 14 to an average of 20 bags an acre. He claims in all his years of farming, he's never had such yields. Interestingly enough, due to the high interest and demand by neighbors and friends, Paul's now started a company called the Soil Revolution, offering consultations on regenerative agriculture. Now, Paul is a great example of how agriculture can be different, safe, productive, and profitable by combining information on the soil microbiome in our farmers' toolkit of knowledge. He and all the farmers across Kenya that are following practices that regenerate soils are a beacon of hope that we must recognize and amplify, incentivize, and encourage, as these farmers will ensure Kenya's food security. My next example will show you that we're almost there. Earlier this year, my team and I at iCow deployed a micro-survey to farmers using the iCow app with an aim to find out about soil health, production activities that may influence soil health, and farmer knowledge of the soil microbiome. Within a week of deploying our survey over mobile phone, we had responses from just under 1,000 farmers from 45 of Kenya's 47 counties. An astounding 88% responded that they were experiencing declining yields over the years. And of these, 66% didn't know why their yields were declining. Many use synthetic fertilizers or a combination of synthetic fertilizers and cow manure. Half use compost. We're almost there, but 90% plow or dig their soils. These very actions contradict each other as we build the microbiome and actively destroy it, having to literally start from scratch the following season. Most didn't know about the life in their soils. Most wanted to learn about life in their soils and the importance of this life to their soil health. What this survey and Paul's story show us is that our farming practices directly impact soil health and productivity. We are decimating the soil microbiome every single day. We now know that crop productivity is not driven by synthetic nutrients, but rather by a healthy soil microbiome. If we extrapolate the response from the first question of our micro-survey slide to an entire nation, our declining yields are endemic year on year. If we consider that our declining yields are due to soil degradation, then the solution to food security surely is not GMOs, but rather focus on soil health, health of the soil microbiome. If we look after the soil microbes, they will look after us by default. We can fix this. The question we need to ask ourselves as a nation is, are we really addressing the root cause of food insecurity? Are seed the problem? Our data from thousands of farmers across multiple micro-surveys does not support this notion. We must be brave enough and daring enough to explore new ways to fix the real root cause, rather than in our desperation, jump onto a solution that has been around for 3 decades and as of yet has not delivered on its promise of solving food security across the world. We must take bold action and pioneer a national solution that can be emulated across our continent by our people, for our people. Should we be genetically engineering seeds for failed soils that exacerbate soil degradation, or fixing soils to support unadulterated seed by building systems that protect, nurture, and regenerate soils? Whose interests do GMOs actually serve beyond the producers of the seed companies that manufacture the inputs they rely on? We need to ask ourselves, do GMOs fix degraded soil? No. Do GMOs increase soil water retention? No. Will GMOs create a dependency on food imports? Yes. Will GMOs lead to loss of seed sovereignty? Yes. Will GMOs lead to loss of food sovereignty? Yes. Should Africa invest in solutions that result in American and European countries feeding us? I think not. Adopting GMOs is an issue of both human rights as well as environmental ecosystem rights. If we make a decision that affects the soil microbiome, which underpins all life above the soil, we risk driving our beautiful country into a backward spiral of unprecedented food insecurity. It'll start in our farmers' fields, in the fields of our food producers. If we adopt GMOs, we risk losing the ground we stand on ecologically, politically, economically, and socially. We can do better. We simply must. So here are some recommendations that I have for Kenya. Make microbiome analysis a legal component of all soil testing carried out in the country, and use this data to create a national soil microbe database. We cannot manage what we do not measure. 2, we should immediately remove or ban agricultural inputs that adversely affect the soil microbiome. 3, we could do with investing in a 10-year nationwide soil regeneration campaign. And finally, nothing will grow without water. We need to invest in water harvesting and conservation and storage at farm level. Let's lead from the front. GMOs are not the answer for Kenya. Thank you.